So, good morning and good afternoon, colleagues and everyone who are here today with us. Today, we're going to be having a webinar, a more conversation about how can we better prepare for El Niño. To give the welcoming to this webinar, I'm passing on to Lily from UNESCO, and she will give the warm welcome to everyone. Lily, please.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jenna. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and maybe good morning for some. A very warm welcome to all of you for joining us today. And I wanted to say just a few words on behalf of UNESCO as co-chair of the GADRRES, and to open this session convened together with INEE. And just to begin by saying a thanks to all of our members and to everyone else who is here with us today. And the fact that so many of you are connected ahead of this El Niño season, rather than us connecting in the middle of a crisis, is itself a sign of what we are trying to achieve today. Education is a right that should not pause when a hazard emerges. So I will be really quick because we have some great speakers lined up, but I wanted to just set the scene with a figure. In 2024 alone, climate-related hazards interrupted schooling for 242 million learners worldwide, and this figure is likely to be an underestimate. We also know that the burden is deeply uneven. South Asia bore the largest share, followed by East Asia and the Pacific, and also by Latin America and the Caribbean, with heat waves, floods, storms, and cyclones as the leading causes. Excuse me. We also know that behind those numbers are classrooms that are closed, there are school years that have been cut short, and learning losses for many children and youth who will never recover from them. So when a hazard like El Niño approaches, our first duty is, of course, to protect life and to keep children physically safe. But if our planning stops there, colleagues, then we are falling short. We have seen analysis of how education systems respond to climate shocks. And we have found that too often the default is simply to close schools rather than to maintain some sort of continuity of learning through alternative pathways. While school closures may protect children and youth in the short run, it costs them their learning. And for the most vulnerable, a prolonged closure can mean that they may never return. And it could also increase their exposure to increased protection risks of other types. Research on El Niño flooding has linked early exposure to lower cognitive scores years afterwards. So we have seen this with past episodes. And across Latin American countries, exposure to disasters has been associated with fewer years of schooling overall. Again, as mentioned, the burden is not shared equally. We know that the most vulnerable are those who are most affected, and this is compounded by other types of crises that they face at the same time. And we know also that prolonged closures risk child labor and forced marriage, and in these cases, girls, of course, are also the most affected. We had seen in the past in parts of Ethiopia and Kenya that forced child marriage rose sharply in the areas that were the worst hit by recent drought, pushing girls out of school for good and never returning. So we do see that it is a matter of protection, but also of equity and of every child's right to learn, and not just the continuity of learning alone. This is why our preparedness work is critical. This is why we are here today, so that these forecasts that have been issued months in advance for El Nino give our sectors something that we rarely had, which is the time to strategize and the time to prepare and to prepare together. Strengthening national capacities and accompanying the preparation of plans for safe operations, for learning continuity, for the return to school, and for protecting our most vulnerable learners can be elaborated together now and before the season hits. And this shift is precisely the focus of what today's session is about, from reacting to anticipating and preparing. And to help us do that, we also have the privilege of having our colleague from the WMO with us to share the latest El Nino outlook. And also, of course, Ms. Faiza Hassan, the director of INEE, who will moderate this space, and Jenna, who is our GADRRRES coordinator, will share concrete tools and actions for both schools and for authorities. So I'll stop there and pass it back now to Jenna to introduce Faiza, and I look forward to our fruitful exchanges. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Lily, for this great setting the scene. I'll pass now to Faiza. Faiza San is the director of INEE, and she'll be our moderator for today. So over to you, Faiza.
Thank you so much, Jana, and thank you, Lily. And really a warm welcome to everyone joining us here today. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today as a moderator in what I hope will be a practical and forward-looking conversation. And so to first ground us in some science, let me introduce our first speaker, Alvaro Silva, from the World Meteorological Organization Coordination Mechanism for Humanitarians. Alvaro will take us through the latest El Nino outlook for 2026, both globally and regionally, and what it means for the season ahead. So, Alvaro, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Faiza. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Jana. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this short presentation on what we may expect until end of the year in terms of El Nino and its climate impacts. I will share now the screen. We have prepared some slides to share with you. Okay. Let me know if you can see in full screen mode. I think yes.
Yes.
Good. Thank you so much. So I'm here today on behalf of the WMO Coordination Mechanism team to deliver this presentation that we think might be important as guidance for the education sector. Again, thank you so much for the invite. And I also like to thank WMO colleagues who provided input to this presentation. Before I start with the climate outlook, we prepared this introductory slide because most of you perhaps don't know yet about WMO coordination mechanism. Others may already know. It's just a reminder what we are and what we are doing. So the WMO coordination mechanism for humanitarians provides situational awareness and expert advice to United Nations and humanitarian agencies. We cover different time scales from days to weeks and months to seasons. So what we normally describe as weather and seasonal climate time scales. We are not running any type of forecasts or having a specific infrastructure to do observations or whatever. We are creating authoritative weather, climate, and water information from WMO members and centers. So WMO has a network of designated centers that for different types of hazards, for different topics, cover globally the needs in terms of the different users and sectors. And we also rely on the expertise from the National Meteorological Hydrological Services, and we, as WMO coordination mechanism, also rely on WCM contributors. That means experts such as we have here today with us, a DWD colleague that is receiving a training in terms of providing better contribute and enhance their collaboration in delivering the products that are now 700 since 2022, and you see the metrics in this page of the different types of products that we are delivering. So, and this is even more important considering the El Nino conditions and the enhanced likelihood for extreme weather and climate events. So we have weekly and tropical cyclone scans. So we have, for example, the Global Hydromet weekly scan that is delivered every Thursday and covers different types of hazards of interest at global scale, and that is available on WCM webpage. And we also have the global seasonal climate outlook briefings and scans that are prepared every month. So this is something that we would like to highlight to all of you, and also to mention that we also play an important role in terms of capacity building. So we are delivering training good contributors to WMO members and to humanitarians in terms of the use of these products. And one important thing to reflect that we are doing this in terms of a co-design approach. So we are in collaboration with UNHCR, with Save the Children, with Start Network, as just an example, co-developing all these products so that we make sure they are fit for purpose. So, but let's now start with the technical presentation. This is the content of the presentation. So we will start a bit explaining what is El Nino, how do we predict El Nino, and then providing you an overview on what we may expect for the next 3 to 6 months in terms of precipitation and temperature patterns, but also in terms of tropical cyclones typical activity, and we will finalize with a summary highlighting the key reasons for concern that perhaps will be important to consider in terms of preparedness and strategic planning of the education sector. About El Nino. So what is El Nino? Many times we hear about ENSO, we hear about El Nino, we hear about ENSO neutral, we hear about La Nina. So the phenomenon itself, it's the El Nino Southern Oscillation, and it reflects that El Nino is not only on oceanic conditions, but also the atmospheric response to these oceanic conditions, and is one of the most world influential climate patterns. So even if it develops in the equatorial Pacific, the El Nino impacts then many regions in different continents, especially tropical regions, but also in many mid latitude regions also has some indirect effects. The El Nino normally is considered as the warm phase of the ENSO, and the La Nina is the cold phase of ENSO. So El Nino and La Nina are the active phases of ENSO, and ENSO neutral is, as we can perhaps simplify it, the normal conditions in the equatorial Pacific. This transition from El Nino to La Nina occurs on average every 3 to 5 years, ranging from 2 to 7 years. So just to give you a very quick overview of past 6 years, we had a multi-year La Nina starting in 2020 and ending in early 2023. Then we had the El Nino in 2023, 2024, and then 2 consecutive weak La Nina conditions the following winters. And we are now, as we will see, already under El Nino conditions. Typically, El Nino develops during spring, summer, like it was the case this year, and peaks towards end of the year in winter. And the difference that is significant between El Niño and La Niña is that El Niño normally is more intense, but La Niña lasts longer, up to 3 years. So that's why we many times refer to multi-year La Niña conditions that occur not only from 20 to 2023, but also in the past. How do we predict El Niño? So the WMO has 15 global producing centers for seasonal prediction that you see in the left map. These are the global centers that then we combine the information, the forecasts produced by these different centers to create a multimodal ensemble, let's say a combination of different outputs of the forecast models, so that we can also access the uncertainty and the probability of El Niño conditions and of the different intensities of El Niño. So when you hear about there is 60% probability of El Niño to develop in the coming 3 months, this means that 60% of the model forecasts are in agreement that we will have El Niño conditions developing. But we will have El Niño conditions developing in the central eastern equatorial Pacific. And when you hear about Niño 3.4 region, this refers exactly to this rectangle that is in the center map in the central eastern equatorial Pacific. That is the most widely used region to monitor and forecast El Niño. So this means that we are only looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies in these regions, and normally during El Niño we see an increase in sea surface temperatures. But El Niño is more than only the oceanic conditions and sea surface temperatures. It's a coupled ocean atmosphere phenomenon. That's why it's not an on-off switch button. It's a gradual developing phenomenon. That's why many times we have some centers saying that we are already in El Niño conditions, and other still mention that we are in the transition phase. So there are different metrics, but one important thing is that this year we are already quite certain that we have El Niño ongoing. And if we see this animation, this is of the El Niño of 27-28, and you can see clearly the development of El Niño conditions in the equatorial Pacific. So you see the dark red colors in this area of the world. Looking now at the El Niño Southern Oscillation and Indian Ocean Dipole state and outlook, and just to mention that El Niño does not act alone. There are additional climate drivers that in many regions also play an important factor, and the Indian Ocean Dipole is one important climate driver that influences the weather and climate patterns in the Indian Ocean basin countries. So normally we should also look closely at its state and outlook. And in terms of El Niño, so WMO already stated that El Niño conditions are ongoing, and that most model forecasts indicate a rapid development into a strong El Niño event later this summer, early autumn. From July to September, there are already the majority of the model forecasts suggesting strong El Niño thresholds in the Central Eastern Pacific. So this means that this is a concern, specifically because when we have a strong El Niño, there is an increased likelihood for extreme weather and climate events in different regions of the world. And in addition, we have also more confidence in terms of the seasonal forecast. And this means that we have a window of opportunity to prepare in advance, because we are more confident that certain climate impacts will happen in different regions. And this is also a bit uncertain, but there are some forecasts suggesting that there is a possibility of an historical El Nino. So we don't have the confidence as mentioning about the strong El Nino to mention about historic El Nino, but it's something that we should put in our decision making trees to have a consideration on the possibility of this historic El Nino as some forecasts are suggesting. And we have here this quote from NOAA that there is a 63% chance of a very strong El Nino during November, January. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, El Nino will not act alone. It's now occurring on top of long-term climate change. We see sea surface temperature, positive sea surface temperature anomalies in different ocean basins. Recently, Copernicus indicated that the sea surface temperatures globally reached record levels for the time of the year. So this means that there are additional conditions that we should take into consideration and not only the typical impacts of El Nino. And this is an important thing because each El Nino comes with different flavors. And looking at the historical impacts of El Nino might be a bit risky because each El Nino will result in different impacts depending on interaction with other climate drivers, and that will act on different vulnerabilities in different regions of the world. This map is very well known from IRI. It shows the typical not guaranteed impacts of El Nino in different periods of the year, because in different regions El Nino will impact in different times of the year. So this is in relation to the precipitation shift patterns, and we see in green the areas where typically El Nino leads to wetter conditions, and in yellow the areas where typically we see drier conditions. And then we have the label with the period of the year this influence of El Nino is stronger. And this period of the year is also reflecting the rainy season in these different areas. If we look at African continent, we see in the Sahel the typical influence of El Nino during the rainy season in July, September. Then in East Africa, the rainy season starting in September and until the end of December, early January, that normally leads to wetter conditions. And in 2023, 2024, we saw these very wet conditions in this region. And leading to floods in some parts. And then in Southern Africa is mainly towards the end of the year with the start of the rainy season that we see this drier pattern emerging, influenced by the El Nino. With positive IOD that is likely to develop, there will be an increased contribution for example, for this rainy season in East Africa. So we may expect weather and much weather than normal conditions, and potential flooding in this part of Africa from September until end of the year. But there are other regions that then will be impacted in different periods, as we indicate in this map. One thing is a key idea to retain from this slide is that here we have the typical influence of El Nino, but we should consider as well additional climate drivers. That's why seasonal forecasts are the best tool to guide preparedness and strategic planning. And we have here the map, the Tersaz map, so the probabilities of below normal, near normal, and above normal precipitation for July, September 2026. And this map is the result of the combined efforts of the global producing centers. The first map that I showed on how we predict El Nino, so all that climate centers that together generate the forecast that then are combined into this single product. And we can see in yellow, orange, the areas where we expect drier conditions, and in green, wetter than normal conditions. So these drier than normal conditions are mostly likely in Central America and the Caribbean and far North and South America. And this is important because it's the period that is the wettest period of the year. So failed rainy season means that we will have increased impacts in many sectors, including in agriculture, and leading to food security issues, but also in terms of energy generation, in terms of health. So, and potentially also then influencing the education sector, because everything is interconnected and there are compound factors then enhancing the impacts in the different sectors that are interconnected. We see also the drier pattern in the maritime continent in the South Asia during the southwest monsoon, and these are critical areas where we expect then the potential drought development, at least in parts of these regions. And these precipitation patterns clearly show a typical response to El Nino. But if we look to the next 3 months period, or if we look at the September-November period, we see one aspect that is important in many regions is the persistence of these drier conditions or wetter conditions emerging and persisting in other regions. We continue to see this drier pattern in Central American Caribbean, extending from North South America towards the Amazon, and reinforcing also during the rainy season in parts of the Indonesia, the Philippines. So this means that we will likely face the typical impacts of drier conditions and drought in these regions. In terms of weather conditions, we see southern Brazil, that its typical response also to El Nino. And in the past, we had severe flooding in this area of South America, but also in coastal South America, in parts of southern North America, and specifically then, and this is an area of big concern in the eastern Great Horn of Africa during the rainy season. And again, a weather pattern emerging in Central West Asia, as typically occurs during El Nino. So one thing is very high probabilities of these patterns, high confidence that this will be the scenario for next 3 to 6 months. And in addition to this typical response to a strong El Nino, leading to these shifts in rainfall patterns. If we look at the temperature forecast, we see mostly a red map. So this means that above normal temperatures are very likely globally. What we would like to emphasize here is that beyond these above normal temperatures likely, there is an increase in terms of risk of heat stress. So this period of the year from June to September, it's a critical period in some northern hemisphere regions in terms of extreme heat. So with El Nino, we will have additional likelihood for extreme heat events to occur. An additional factor, as I mentioned, is the sea surface temperatures that are exceptionally high in different parts of the world, and this tends to reinforce the occurrence of heat waves also over land areas. And also a well-known response is that then a warmer atmosphere can also intensify hydrological extremes. So when we have El Nino conditions, we know that the atmosphere can hold more moisture. This means enhanced conditions for heavy rainfall events, and also a more evaporative demand in some areas, enhancing droughts that tend to develop with drier conditions in these areas. Finally, in terms of the tropical cyclones, typical activity, it's important to note that El Niño influences also some ocean basins in terms of the activity. But what we would like to emphasize here, it's important to continuously monitoring the information that is available from regional specialized meteorological centers and tropical cyclone warning centers during this period of the year, especially in Northern Hemisphere, because it's the active season in different parts of the Northern Hemisphere, as we can see in this table on the left, and it's the core or the peak period in some of these areas. So it's important to continuously monitoring the forecasts in the Northern Hemisphere, at least until end of October. Then from November, also the Southern Hemisphere, the tropical cyclone activity will be starting. Finally, we will not go through all these to all these reasons of concern, just to reflect on an important thing is that El Niño is ongoing. There is a high likelihood that strong El Niño is developing rapidly, and this will influence rainfall patterns and increase temperatures globally. And this means that the impacts will follow these conditions in different regions during the second half of this year, but also beyond. In 2027, we will also see many impacts related with this strong El Niño. And I think it's all from our side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. That was a really sobering presentation. We have a few minutes to take some questions from the floor. To everyone who's participating, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box in the chat, and then we will do our best to answer them. So Alvaro, to start off with, there's two questions that I can see right now in the chat. The first one is from Wenda in Indonesia, who says that they're revising the national climate change guidelines and modules and considering to add a section about El Niño. Can you share references and teaching materials for them to leverage as an additional resource?
Yes, so thank you so much for the question. In the WMO website, you can find additional information on El Niño and the links to the updates on El Niño. Then in the slides that we will be sharing with you, we have in annex some useful links where you can find additional information. And it's important to note that there are trusted sources that you may consider to use to create these guidelines. First, starting with the National Meteorological Hydrological Service, that is the authority on weather and climate information for Indonesia, I think BKMG. And then, in addition to this, the Regional Climate Center for that area, and then at global scale, the normal updates that we are releasing in WMO, such as the El Niño La Niña update every 3 months. So next one will be by end of August, early September. Normally, these are this is the normal calendar, but also the global seasonal climate update that we are releasing every month, and the global seasonal climate outlook briefing that the WMO coordination mechanism is delivering to the UN and humanitarian agencies every last Wednesday of the month. In terms of guidance, is really to reflect that the decision making, the support to decision making should be based on trust information, because nowadays It's easy to find information in many different sources, but it's important that we follow the authoritative sources at national level and then also at regional and global level so that we can take the best guidance available.
Thank you, Alvaro. One more question in the chat that I can see is, can we expect these impacts in 2026 or also going into 2027?
Yes, for sure. The impacts will be expected in 2026 during the second half. There are some regions already reflecting this El Niño influence, for instance, in Central America, the drier conditions. Then it will not be an immediate response in terms of impacts to the developing El Niño conditions. For instance, the drought does not start from one day to another. It's developing process. But for sure, with these persistent anomalies, with drier conditions in many regions and wetter conditions in other regions, we will have for sure some significant impacts. And then not only in 2026, but also in 2027. So some forecasts suggest the peak of El Niño towards end of the year. That's what normally happens and what is the suggestion from the model forecasts. But the impacts may stay beyond this period. For example, the global temperatures normally reach record levels the year after the El Niño development. That was the case in 2024. That was the record warmest year, even considering that El Niño start developing in 2023.
Thank you, Alvaro. And then one final question is, how does this event compare with recent El Niño years, and what does that tell us about lead time for preparedness?
Thank you. It's a very important question, and the forecasting community, so WMO community, the centers are much better prepared. The forecasts have better skill compared to previous events. So we could inform UN and humanitarian stakeholders of the potential El Niño development already the beginning of this year. And then when we start having more confidence in the forecast for a strong El Niño, we recently released this update informing that there is really high likelihood of a strong El Niño event. So we are better prepared in terms of what science can inform early action and preparedness actions. In terms of comparing with historical El Niño or at least strong El Niño events, so we had in 2023, 2024, a moderate strong El Niño, and the forecast suggests that at least that the conditions in the equatorial Pacific the thresholds might be above that El Niño thresholds that were reached in 2023, 2024. So this would mean that we will have a stronger event. Then we had a historical El Niño in 2015, 2016, and another one in 27, 2028. Using this as reference in terms of impacts might be a bit risky because each El Niño is unique. So building knowledge from past events is useful so that we can identify some of the typical impacts so that we are more aware of the risk that is this El Niño. It's a global risk. That's for sure, but we should guide our action, our preparedness and planning on the seasonal forecasts that provide not only the influence of El Niño, but also additional factors. And we just mentioned that, for example, sea surface temperatures are on record levels in different areas of the world. And this for sure will influence the impacts of El Niño combined with these additional factors, and this is now occurring on top of long-term climate change. So even during ENSO-neutral years, we see more extreme weather and climate events occurring, more intense, and this will even be worse with these El Niño conditions, especially with the strong El Niño that is developing.
Thank you so much, Alvaro. We could keep going, but I think in the interest of time, we should pose questions here. So again, thank you, Alvaro, for providing such a clear foundation. And this now takes us to our next intervention, because forecasts give us in the education sector what we rarely have, which is time to prepare. And to turn that outlook into concrete action, I would like to welcome Jana, the coordinator of GADRRRES, who will share with us a list of practical tools and the specific actions that we can take ahead of the season rather than in the middle of the crisis. Jana, over to you.
Hi, colleagues. Thank you so much for the presentation, colleagues from the WMO. It was very useful. The last 15 minutes we have here, I want to use for us to look on how can we better prepare and what are the resources available for us to better prepare as well. So here is like, are we ready for what have we been doing to really prepare harder than just be like caught in the middle of like emergency or crisis? And a reflection that I want to bring to all of us first is that, like traditionally, when we speak about school safety or we speak about preparedness, we always think about rules, evacuation, safety plans, and those are very important, and they are very focused on saving lives during the impact. However, we need to go above and beyond that. We normally left the unplanned aspects of education, such as the plan for the learning continuity, how every student's going to go back to school or return to school, and also how we can adapt curriculum and pedagogical approaches so we can decrease the impact and decrease the disruption to education. So we need basically to combine. We need to think about safety, but also we need to think about how we can ensure the continuity of education, right? And this needs to be happening now, not when we are in that situation. One, because this lack of planning increase the burden on teachers, right? And on schools, because normally when we are impacted, schools, teachers, they tend many times not have the directions from the government of the education authorities, and that can create overburden. It can create also burnout for teachers, but also it decreases our capacity as a system to ensure the right education. So that's something for all of us to have in mind. And that also explains why we're here today with the Comprehensive School Safety Framework and also with the INEE, right? The INEE framework that we looks into more practical aspects of the education. For the colleagues who are not familiar, to a very quick overview, we have a few components of the CSSF that are key. We have the foundations that we're going to be looking to the enabling system policies. We need to look into safe school facilities. We need to look to school safety and education continuity management. Big part of our planning is sitting in this pillar 2. And the pillar 3, which is risk reduction, resiliency education, that looks into the pedagogical approach. So the CSSF is very helpful for kind of help us to think about how we structure preparedness. And the reason why I'm looking at the CSSF as well, it's because the way we have the resources organized in the resource page that I'm going to be sharing with you today. But before we look into that, I just put it here very quickly. What's the goals of the CSSF? So when we think about the Comprehensive School Safety Framework, we think about protecting learners and educators. We think about saving lives. When we think about plan, we need to think about how can we plan for the education and protection, the continuity of education. And that's the element that has been massively left out of the picture, that we need to stop just responding to it, but preparing for it. And also we have the promoting the knowledge and skills, what we want our students and people know so they can be better prepared for what's coming. Here are just two quick images. The sociological model, we always think about children in the center. We need to have them involved from the very beginning in terms of preparedness, but also the collective approach. So when you go back and you look into how you're going to do that on your country, on your municipality, or in your city community, we need to have an intersectional approach. We need to have not just education people, we need climate people, we need civil protection, disaster risk reduction colleagues, health colleagues as well. So that's the diseases that also bring that agenda that we need to look at from an intersectional approach. Otherwise, we're going to fail what we're trying to do, right? I'll stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to share the list of resources. So the list of resources that we're going to be sharing today, give me 1 second. Here it is. There are two versions of it. There is a low, like one that requires very low widthband connection. So for colleagues who are in areas where maybe the connection is not great, we have prepared an Excel sheet where you can see which pillar you're addressing, the name of the resources, what this can help me with, the organization, the year, and the language. So that's on Excel. And then we have to prepare something more visual, right? Which is this web page that we will be sharing with you. INEE and GADRRRES have their own web page. Why we have done this separated, so we can have something more visual that could be more helpful for the colleagues. Here, we're going to have find resources that help us to prepare, to better respond, and to better recover from the impact of El Niño. And you're going to see that some of those resources are going to be targeting specific types of hazards. So some of them will be like for flooding, and some of them will be like for drought, or extreme heat, or cyclones, or even food insecurity. So you see this division where you're going to find the resources. And the resources, you can see they are divided by the Comprehensive School Safety Framework. So anything to do with foundation will be more on the policy analysis assessment level. And here you're going to find resources from all the different members from UNICEF, UNESCO, GADRRRES, Save the Children, Plan International, all these different organizations who have produced resources over the years, and that can be helpful for us. You're going to see resources that can be helpful for school level. So if you are a teacher or if you are a school director, that you can use, but also you're going to see things that can be used by local authorities or even national level authorities, or even INGOs or local NGOs. And then you can have on pillar one, everything to do with infrastructure, right? So for instance, we have here the guidance for building resilience to extreme heat. We're going to have the green schools and health care facilities. All those resources have been curated because we have so many resources. We have curated the ones that we think are the most useful and impactful for your preparedness for El Niño. For pillar two, you're going to see everything to do with school safety and education continuity. And here you're going to see some elements on NHPSS as well, psychosocial support, because they are a very important element in terms of preparedness. And you will see also child-centered multi-risk assessments. We can also see some of the catch-up programs and guidance that helps us to think about how we're going to have those practices on the returning to schools. And then we have the pillar three, which is the risk reduction resilience education. This one is particularly helpful for schools and teachers because they're going to have pedagogical materials and also materials that can be used at the school level. And the last but not least important, we're going to see resources that are cross-cutting thematics. So we're going to see disability and inclusion, gender materials that can help us to have this disability inclusion and gender lens as part of preparedness. So all those resources have been, it's here. It's also, you can see the year that has been produced and the language in which each of those resources are available. You click it, this is going to direct you to the web page. So these resources are going to be shared with you on the follow-up email, and also going to be published in INEE and also GADRRRES web page. I think I will stop it here. And I'll check if there is, yes, I see the questions about the research. If there is any questions from the audience in terms of the list of resources or any other question related to the education response and preparedness. Over to you, Faiza.
Thank you so much, Jana. And thank you to Alvaro and Lily as well. And I would like to thank everyone who's joined us today. We've reached the end of our webinar. And listening to everything that was shared so far, I think one thing we can take away is that with El Nino, we can see the risk coming and we should be able to take action to advocate with our governments, with our organizations, and with schools to prepare in advance to make sure that learning continues. You can, as Jana said, the resources will be shared. They'll be emailed out to all webinar participants. They'll be published on both GADRRRES and INEE websites. And the webinar has also been recorded and will be shared as well. So again, thank you very much to everyone. And I can see Jana, is there anything you would like to share before we close?
Yes, Faiza, just because I saw a comment from colleagues on the chat as well. In terms of case studies, we have been compiling some case studies as well. So the idea is that if you attended this webinar and you have a resource or you have a case study that you want to share with us, please do reach out to us by email. You can find our emails. I'll put here the GADRRRES one on the chat, but you can also find that information on the website. We are compiling some learning experiences from previous emergencies, especially if you look at the list of materials, you're going to see one about the flooding in Pakistan that has a very interesting lessons learned on how they have deployed technological techie infrastructure to ensure the continuity of education, but that will be doing the same for others, not only about flooding, but also about the heat waves and extreme weathers and droughts, because that also impact directly the right to education. And then maybe, Faiza, one last comment before we close. I saw a message from a colleague, Hatem, who also asked about what about the areas where we have the conflict. And I think that is where it's still very challenging. But I think some of the materials that we have shared, they are useful at the local level, at school level, for preparedness aspects. And in terms for more planning and preparedness, there are some material available in our guidance on the links as well that has a conflict and climate lens. So it helps the education authorities to plan having that both lens to be able to work better on preparedness from a policy level and planning level. But we have to recognize that there is a challenge when we have a conflict area and that also impacted by climate. But those are areas where we also need to focus our attention for support. I think that's from my side. Thank you, Faiza.
Thank you so much, Jana. That was really helpful. I think, yeah, like I said, we've come to the close, and I'll end by a comment here saying that, this will be a difficult season, but the best we can do is share the lessons and resources to prepare in advance. So, yeah, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.